Hey guys, my name's Alex and welcome back to my YouTube channel. So now that I'm in college, I'm supposed to be making decisions that are like real adult decisions. Like I'm supposed to choose a college major and like ideally I spend like the next 4 years learning about this college major. And that college major is supposed to lead into a job that I spend like the next 40 or 60 years of my life working at. And that's like a lot of pressure for like the average 18 or 19-year-old like adult to make decisions about. So at first I wanted to make a video about like my personal take and like just the best advice I've ever gotten on like what to do with your life and like how to choose what to do with your life. But I like quickly realized that like any answer that I wanted to give to that was just not like super simple and straightforward because of the fact that like the question what I should do with my life is not like an isolated question that you just ask, like you figure out the answer to that and then just move on. Like that question is intricately linked to your worldview and like how you find meaning in life and like what all of that is. And so I think it's really hard to like give advice on like what you think the meaning of life is without some type of context to back up your answer. So I decided it would be a lot easier to take a step back and like answer the question, what is the meaning of life? And that will give the context for my answer on what we should do with our lives. And then lastly, I want to talk about how my experience with Stanford has been colored based off of my answers and like what I generally think about the Stanford experience through that lens. So to me, the meaning of life is actually like quite simple. It's to live with and for other people. Living within interconnected webs of people where our lives are deeply intertwined with others is the thing that gives our lives meaning. I have never doubted that the lives of my friends or family matter. They just do. And I know that they feel the same way about me, and that's how I know that my life matters. Like, I know that isn't like the objective answer that everyone looks for. Like, God isn't coming down to tell you exactly why you're here on this earth, and like science isn't going to solve any of our existential angst anytime soon. But I think if you really take a step back and really think about it, I think that is the only possible answer. Meaning can only be understood within the context of other people because we can only be understood in the context of other people. A common thought experiment is if a tree falls in the woods and no one is around to hear it, did it really make a noise? I think honestly a much more telling question is if a tree falls in the woods and only one person hears it, did it really make a noise? Like I don't mean on like an objective scientific level, did it like produce sound waves? Like I know it did. But like what I'm really getting at is that we need other people to validate our own perception of the universe. The experience that really hammered this home for me is that over the summer I went on this big road trip and I would go stargazing like pretty frequently, and like I would see these stars in the sky and like I would occasionally see a shooting star, and like shooting stars happen so quickly and so briefly that whenever I saw one I would always doubt whether or not I had just seen a shooting star. I would be like, oh, did I just like flicker my eyes across the sky too quickly, or did I just blink and imagine that? And like having no one there to be like, oh no, I definitely saw a shooting star, just constantly made me second guess myself. And I just realized how much of our perception of the universe is based upon and like reliant upon other people. Like we define reality as the common experience between all people. People who hear things or see things that other people do not are literally considered crazy. Our understanding of reality has always been completely dependent on the people around us. And think about how much of the world you only understand because other people. Like I would not have known that the world is a sphere unless I was like told that and taught that growing up. I've never been to Turkey. How am I supposed to know that Turkey is a real place outside of the maps that I look at that are constructed and verified by other people? And even more broadly speaking, just think about like the concept of money and how fundamental money is to like just society's operating. And think about how like the only reason that money has value is because we all agree that money has value. On like a universal scale, that doesn't make any sense. But that's because we don't make any sense on a universal scale. And it's not just that the meaning of life is living with other people. It's that there's no meaning that we can possibly grasp outside of other people. Like how can we seek answers to our existence outside of our relationships with others if our relationships with others is the only thing that we have? Like the answer has always been right in front of us. Okay, so that's the easy part. The real question then is what do you do with your life? Okay, well, for starters, I think we normally go about answering this question in like a very individualistic viewpoint. The question is always like, what makes me happy? What am I passionate about? What do I want to do? And I just don't necessarily think that's like the best way to go about answering this question. I have always kind of had problems with this. One, because I've never liked something enough to want to do it for 40 hours a week for the rest of like my life, like 30 to 60 years. Like that's a lot. Anytime you make your passion your like job, like that's just gonna put a lot more pressure on it to the point where it's like no longer this carefree source of enjoyment. Even playing video games and watching TV shows would get boring if I had to do them 40 hours a week. Like they would lose a lot of their enjoyment. I think there's this idea that we just need to find what we're passionate about and like everything will kind of work itself out. But that's not true. Like no matter what we choose to do with our lives, we're always going to have to like do things that we don't want to do. Like I think passion is an extremely fickle emotion. You can be passionate about something, but then the next day when you actually have to like put in the work to do it, you're like, oh, this is not nearly as fun as like I had idealized it to be in my head. So like what do I do then when like passion isn't like enough to just push me to do everything I need to do? And I think that's worth talking about. Like just doing what individually makes you happy may not not just be the best way to live our lives? I think this question is honestly just best answered in a societal context. Like, what can I do for society? Find out what problem exists in society. Like, what is there a need for in society? And just become a person that can solve that problem. Obviously, I think like the problem has to align with like what you value and what you like kind of enjoy doing as a person. But I think like the goal of it should be to help society in some way. In my mind, this allows you to get over the hurdles and not wanting to do your job because you understand that you are working for a greater purpose than to just make yourself happy. It's not just your own happiness or your own personal well-being at stake. You have a responsibility to the lives of people that you could genuinely improve and make better. To be completely honest, I can't really imagine working a full-time job when I'm older. Like working 40 hours a week for like 50 weeks a year for like 30 to 40 years literally gives me anxiety. Like I can't imagine that. That sounds awful. But when I do imagine like having to like go to work and get myself out of bed in the morning, I can't imagine that my own personal happiness is going to be the thing that gets me out of bed. I feel like there's almost no way I wouldn't just be happier if I didn't have to work. Like I can't imagine enjoying doing a job unless I felt like it was necessary or like I was giving up my own personal happiness for something worthwhile. Like I was doing something to better society and people, and that made it worth it to sacrifice my own personal happiness or to do things I didn't necessarily always want to do. Okay, so now I want to connect this with my experience here at Stanford. And like before I say anything, because this is honestly like kind of a critique, I just want to acknowledge that like I am by no means exempt from my own critiques. I'm by no means a perfect person. So I think a lot of the ways that people like approach jobs or careers here is like very isolated from the rest of like the world and society. It's like, what do I want to do? Like, what are my dreams? What are my passions? Like, what do I personally want? And I just think that like the way that we've like normalized this question just being like completely independent to our societal responsibility is a shame. Obviously this is not everybody, and I'm not even saying it's like the majority. I'm just saying there's a significant portion of people here who I do think feel this way, or this is the general vibe that I've gotten from people after talking to like, you know, like a relatively good amount of people here. So I think the general vibe I get here is that I'm going to become as successful as I can. I'm going to garner as many achievements as I can, and I'm going to get the lifestyle that I really want. And if in the process I can help people, awesome. But that is like a secondary concern to the main goal of just ensuring that I'm gonna live like the cozy, comfortable lifestyle that I want, and I'm gonna do what I think is great. Like obviously I can't like completely fault people for this, because at the end of the day I also want to live like a relatively comfortable life where I get to like go on vacations and like not have to worry about financial independence. I think that's like a totally valid take, but I think I wish it were more of a balancing act. It's like, how much do I really need for myself, balanced with the idea that like I do really need to do something that provides some real value for society. But like I feel like it's just really normal to be okay with like not caring too much about what you do for society and like kind of just getting your own bag. Like I think we need to stress more that like the decisions we make in our lives aren't like isolated decisions, right? Like my decision of like career is not just like a thing that only affects me, right? Like because my career will in some way affect society, whether it makes society better or like slightly worse or like contributes to like growing systems of inequality. There's no way to just exist in this society without also influencing it. And so because of that, I think it's weird that we kind of like isolate the decisions we make from a greater societal perspective. Not to say that we don't like need to include like what we personally want as people and like our own like financial security and stuff like that, but I think it just needs to be like a much bigger balancing act than it currently is. I think it needs to be acknowledged that like the decisions we make about what to do with our lives are like symbolic of the things that we value, right? And so if we're making decisions that show that we value our own personal lifestyle and our own personal well-being kind of like over the growth and flourishing of humanity, I think that's like something people should be called out on. Like I think we should be pushed to accept like a greater degree of social responsibility. The Stanford kids I've met here are like in a unique position because these are like supposed to be like the smartest kids in the country, and like these kids honestly are actually like really hardworking. Like some of these kids freaking grind. They're hardworking, they're ambitious, they're talented, and like honestly some of them are massively wealthy. Like these are the types of kids that can like in theory just drastically change the world. But I also think it is completely normalized here to like just sell out and like pick a job that doesn't really help anyone, but that makes you an insane amount of money. You know what this feels like? This feels like Attack on Titan. Only the top 10 best cadets can join the military police, but the military police, which have the most qualified individuals, end up producing like the least meaningful work for society. This is exactly what it feels like being here sometimes. So I admit that I'm making like a lot of really general claims and really broad strokes about a lot of people, and I don't know individual people and like what their individual motivations are for like choosing the jobs that they do. And I think that's a very fair criticism, right? Like I think changing the world is a privilege that only comes when you don't have to worry about meeting your immediate like needs. However, shouldn't that just increase the pressure that we put on the privilege to actually change something about society? I admit that there are some people out there who are like really disadvantaged, so all they want and all they can focus on is like securing basic needs for them and their family. And I honestly think that's totally valid. But I think on the flip side, that means that we need to put like more responsibility on the people who can do things to change the world, to like change the world, right? So those are just like my basic thoughts on the question of what we should do with our lives. I did not at all want to make this video to insinuate that I'm better than other people. These are honestly just my thoughts. And I do want to mention that I do think a lot of people here are genuinely like some of the best people I've ever met. Like they care so much about the world, and I find that so refreshing. I mainly want this video to serve as a reminder to me to not value success and prestige over all else, that I want to create something of real value. That's today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I will see you guys next week. Boop.